The snow under my knee squealed like new leather, and the cold bit through my wool as if it had teeth. Beyond the fire's last red coals, something breathed in the dark, slow and deliberate. Not a horse, not a man. When it rose, the pines seemed to shrink. A muzzle, pale eyes, shoulders higher than any wolf, and hands hanging at its sides. It stood upright and watched us. Men asked me, in rooms and in saloons, to set down what happened on that winter cut. I asked that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and left a comment below for the record and my peace still. It began 3 weeks earlier, on the 3rd of November 1892, when the Manistee River still ran open and the sleigh roads were only mud. I had been hired as camp clerk and chainman for the Wyman outfit. He sent north of Wellston to mark a stand of white pine and hemlock bought from a failed shingle concern. Our foreman was Asa Harkness, a hard Methodist with a neat beard and a Winchester. With him came Eli Proul, teamster Doc Ransom, the cook, and young Calvin Reed, the scaler, who spoke often of his mother in Kalamazoo. On the first night we camped at the edge of a cedar swamp. We boiled coffee in a blackened pot and passed Asa's pouch of cut plug, though he pretended it was medicine. Boots steamed by the fire. The men spoke of wages and the river drive, and Calvin told how his mother sent him sermons folded in letters. Eli, quiet and watchful, said wolves sometimes followed a sleigh near Pentwater, but he spoke of them as one speaks of weather. I remembered thinking that the North Country bred tall tales as naturally as it grew pine, and I wrote the day's figures in my ledger with ink that froze in the nib. 2 days later, we laid out the first lines with my compass and chain, flagging with red cloth. The timber stood so thick that noon looked like late afternoon. Toward dusk, while I stretched the chain and Calvin called the links, a sound came from the hollow westward, a long note, neither howl nor loon, rising and breaking as if a man tried to whistle through his teeth. We halted without speaking. A moment after, the woods went quiet. Not the ordinary hush of falling snow, but a stopping, as if every small creature held its breath. Asa cleared his throat and said it was a lynx and ordered us on. I agreed at the time because agreement kept a crew moving, yet I marked the place in my mind. That night, the horses would not nose their grain. Eli cursed and soothed them by turns. I went out with a lantern and found tracks along the slash, wolf-like yet too large, set oddly, as if hind feet had taken the place of fore. They ran straight through bramble and over fallen tops, not wandering as a hunting wolf did. In the morning, fresh snow softened them, and by noon they had sagged into nothing, as if the ground had never carried weight. Doc said perhaps a bear had crossed, and the thaw had fooled my eye. I wrote nothing of it in the company book. By the 10th of November, more men came in, bringing crosscut saws and peavies, and our spirits lifted. Yet each evening, when the last wedges were driven, we heard the same long note from the hollow, closer now, and sometimes it seemed to answer itself, as if two mouths took turns. Once it carried the cadence of a man hailing his dog. Calvin asked if any trapper lived near. Asa said no man would winter in that swamp and ordered lights out. We took our bearings from an old section line and a blaze-marked trail that an Ottawa man at the Wellston store called the Little Bear Path. He warned Eli quietly not to sleep where the cedars grew in rings. Eli laughed then. On the 14th, we crossed such a ring and met a pocket of air so cold it stung the lungs. Frost lay on the needles though the sun shone. Birds ceased and did not resume behind us. That afternoon, we found a spruce with its bark peeled high, the wood beneath scored by 4 parallel grooves, deep as a gouge. Asa laid his mittened hand against them and said, "Bear sign." Calvin measured with my rule and said nothing, but his face tightened. The next day, Doc hung a side of salt pork in the cook shanty, and in the morning it lay in the snow outside, the cord cut clean, the meat punctured as if by narrow awls. No drag marks led away. There was only a smell, rank musk with wet dog under it and something like old smoke. Asa set a steel trap in the doorway and dusted flour on the threshold. At dawn, the flour showed a print like a bare heel and splayed toes, broad and wrong, and the trap lay sprung with nothing in it. After that, the bunkhouse talk changed. Men still played euchre, but their laughter came short. On the 20th, a wet fog rolled off the swamp at sundown and settled among the stumps. The air turned sharp, colder than it ought to have been. From beyond the cook shanty we heard steps, slow and heavy, and the cadence did not match 4 feet. Asa took his lantern and went out. The light made a small yellow wall, and the fog swallowed it. He came back saying he had seen nothing, yet his coat carried the musk. Near midnight, I woke to the team's snorting. There was scratching at the bunkhouse logs, steady as a man notching a tally. It stopped, and the camp fell into a silence so complete that I heard my own blood. Between the chinking cracks, a shadow slid across the snow, tall and narrow, and paused at the door. Through a knothole, I saw a slice of muzzle, black fur rimed with frost, and one pale eye. The breath came in a long, measured pull, as if it savoured our warmth. When I looked again, it was gone, and 2 deep impressions stood outside in the flour. In the morning, Calvin refused to go into the timber alone. We worked in pairs and kept rifles within reach of the skidways. Eli found one of his traces cut halfway through, clean as if by a knife, with teeth marks too even for a wolf. The men argued over whether a stranger had come into camp. Asa said no man could walk 20 miles through swamp in that weather without showing himself. Yet our own boot prints were traced over in the snow, as if someone had studied how we moved. Doc returned from the creek with his tin dipper crushed as though by a vice. On November 24th, the first heavy snow came, and with it a wind off Lake Michigan that piled drifts against the bunkhouse door. The supply sleigh from Baldwin did not arrive, and the road markers vanished under white. Asa said we would sit tight until the blow eased. That evening, the horses screamed, a sound I had never heard from a horse, and then fell to a trembling quiet. Eli went out with a lantern and came back leading them by the halters as if they were blind. Their flanks were lathered and their eyes showed red. Behind the stable, in the snow, lay a strip of bark torn from a log, and on it were the same parallel grooves, new and wet. The musk odour thickened with the storm, as if it rode the snow itself. At dawn on the 25th, the storm slackened. We went to dig out the cook shanty and found our axe helves laid in a neat row, heads toward the door, as if someone had set them there in mockery. Calvin crossed himself. Asa ordered a search of the perimeter. I took the north line with Eli. In the young poplar we came upon tracks again, huge pads with toe marks, but they began in the open snow and ended the same way, with no approach and no departure. While we stared, a low sound issued from the timber, a half growl and half chuckle, and something moved between the trunks, taller than any man and broader than a bear. Eli raised his rifle. The cap snapped, and the charge did not take, though the powder had been kept dry. The figure withdrew without haste. 2 nights after Ellis' misfire, Asa ordered the men to stay close and keep the fire banked high. The wind fell, and the cold settled heavy, making the snow squeal under a boot. I sat with Asa, Eli, and Calvin by the coals, hearing, beyond the light, that slow breathing I had first taken for a horse. A shape moved among the pines, and the odor of musk and old smoke drifted in. It stepped into the open and rose, not rearing like a bear, but standing as a man stood, shoulders higher than a wolf's back. Its forelimbs hung with the turn of wrists, dark against the snow. Asa leveled his Winchester. The creature did not flinch at the click. Calvin whispered, "Wolves do not stand like that." When Asa fired, the report echoed, and the figure was simply gone, leaving the coals burning and the night louder still. We did not sleep. At first light, Asa called the crew out and said the cut was finished, though our tally showed otherwise. We loaded what we could on the sleighs, leaving saw bolts, a broken peavey, and half our stores. In the road, the fog returned and the horses balked. Ears. Something paced us in the timber, keeping even with the teams, and now and then we heard that whistled note, close enough to raise hair on the neck. Eli snapped his whip, and the horses lunged. When the trail crossed a creek, the ice boomed under us like cannon, yet it held, and we did not look back. We reached Baldwin by nightfall, half mad with weariness, and the station agent let us warm ourselves by the pot-bellied stove and listened without smiling. Asa went to the sheriff in Lake County and filed a complaint against no one, for there was no name to write. In the company report, he blamed wolves, poor roads, and early snow, and the superintendent nodded, eager to protect the contracts. Only Doc, in a private letter to his sister, wrote softly, "Something walked our camp like a man, and it was not a man." In March of 1893, the company printed a notice in the Manistee papers about losses to wolves and weather, and that was the end in ink. Asa never spoke of it again, except once when he pressed my ledger shut and said, "Write what you saw, but do not give it a name." A name made it a matter for argument, and we had met something beyond argument that night. Years later, in 1907, I met Eli Prue at a boarding house in Luddington. He had gone grey, and he kept his hands folded to hide a tremor. We spoke of horses until a dog barked in the alley, and both of us fell quiet. Eli said he still woke when fog pressed against his pane, and he could smell musk in clean air. I told him that a stove popping made me think of ice booming under a sleigh. I returned once to the old section line with a surveyor, and we found a spruce scarred high above any bear's reach. Once at Houghton Lake, I heard the note. What did it want, I did not know. Every November, I watched the tree line until the light failed. On my desk, flour remained in the ledger's crack.